Welcome back to my channel. For those who don't know, my name is Danny, and I'll show you my cooking and gardening life with my husband Thomas. We are passionate cooking people and love to bring our own food to our table. If you would like to join us, then stay with me on our journey of building a garden for food, processing our own harvest, reducing costs, and eating healthy food. And yes, this is still the same garden that looked at us in the beginning and said, "Are you sure you two know what you are doing?" Honestly, sometimes we are not sure either, but step by step, plant by plant, screw by screw, and mistake by mistake, this garden is slowly becoming our little food paradise. Today we continue with the next chapter of our Let's Do Gardening journey. And as always, we start with a lot of motivation, a little bit of chaos, and probably at least one moment where Thomas looks at something and says, that was not planned like this. But that is gardening, right? You start the day with one simple idea, and suddenly you are building, digging, carrying, fixing, watering, cutting, and wondering why your back feels like you are 97 years old. In today's episode, we are working again on our garden projects and bringing everything a little closer to our dream. A garden where we can grow vegetables, fruits, herbs, and maybe one day enough food to say proudly, "This came from our own garden." And of course, because we are cooking people, every plant here already has a future job. The garlic is not just garlic, it is future garlic butter, future pasta sauce, future roasted vegetables, and maybe future protection against vampires, just in case our red apple tree attracts dramatic company. The raised beds are not just wooden boxes, they are little food factories in progress. And the garden paths, the fence, the beds, the trees, and all the small corners we are working on, they are slowly turning from wild adventure zone into something that actually looks like a garden. Well, most of the time. Some areas still look like a construction site with plants, but a very charming construction site. This whole project is not about having a perfect garden immediately. It is about learning, trying, improving, and building something with our own hands. Sometimes it works perfectly. Sometimes it works after the third attempt. And sometimes we just stand there, look at each other and say, "Okay, new plan." But that is exactly what makes it fun. We want to show the real process. Not only the pretty finished pictures, but also the work behind it. The digging, the carrying, the dirty hands, the tired faces, and the little happy moments when something finally works. Because every screw in the fence, every plant in the soil, and every finished corner means we are getting closer. Closer to fresh vegetables, closer to our own fruit, closer to homemade meals with ingredients from this garden, and closer to the dream of taking simple food from the soil into the kitchen and finally onto the plate. And maybe one day, when we cook something with our own tomatoes, garlic, strawberries, herbs, and apples, we will look back at these first episodes and say, "Wow, we really started with a jungle and a lot of hope." So join us today for another Real Garden update from Austria. There will be progress, probably some funny moments, maybe a few confused looks, and definitely more work than we first expected. But that is okay, because this garden is teaching us patience, creativity, and one very important life lesson. Never underestimate how long a small garden job can take. Let's get started with episode 9 of Let's Do Gardening. The next job on our garden list sounds very simple: mowing the grass. But in a garden like this, mowing the grass is not just about making everything look nice and tidy. It is actually much more important than you might think. First of all, we have a lot of ticks here, and when the grass gets too long, it becomes the perfect little luxury hotel for them. Not exactly the kind of guests we want to invite into our garden. So cutting the grass regularly helps us keep the garden safer, especially when we are walking around, working in the beds, or when the dogs are running through the garden. But there is another big reason why we like mowing the grass. We can use the grass clippings as mulch for our beds. And honestly, I love that. Nothing goes to waste. The grass is cut, then it gets a second life as protection for the soil. It helps to keep moisture in the ground, it protects the surface from drying out too quickly, and it slowly turns into organic material. So basically, the grass gets a new job after being fired from the lawn. While Thomas is mowing the meadow, I continue with the next planting project. Today, I am setting more garlic cloves into the soil. Garlic is one of those things we use all the time in the kitchen, so growing our own just makes sense. If everything works well, these small cloves will hopefully become beautiful garlic bulbs later in the season. And while I am already in planting mode, we also prepare a new little field for our sprouted potatoes. We planted different potato varieties here because we are very curious to see which ones will grow best in our garden. And of course, it is always more exciting when you do not know exactly what the harvest will look like. Gardening is basically a surprise box with mud. After planting the potatoes, we covered them with grass clippings as mulch. This helps protect the soil and keeps it from drying out too fast. But potatoes need a little extra care as they grow. When the green plants come up and get bigger, we have to hill them up. That means we will pull more soil around the plants, so the potatoes can grow well underground and stay protected from sunlight. That is why we already prepared a row of soil next to the potatoes. It may look a little funny now, like we built a small potato wall, but it will be useful later. So while one part of the garden gets a haircut, another part becomes a future garlic and potato area. And step by step, this garden is turning more and more into what we dreamed of. A place where we can grow our own food, use what nature gives us, and hopefully bring many of these ingredients straight into our kitchen. Because for us, this is not just gardening. This is future cooking, and maybe also future sore muscles. After planting, one thing is always very important: watering. Freshly planted plants are a little bit like us after a long garden day. They need a good drink. So before we move on, everything gets watered properly. The soil should be moist enough so the roots can settle in, connect with the ground, and recover from being moved around. Especially young plants need this extra care in the beginning, because they are still delicate and not fully established yet. Every time we are in the garden, I also check our small nursery raised beds in the stone bed area. At the moment, we already have strawberries growing here, some pink radish and cauliflower. This little area is very useful for us because we can keep young plants here until they are strong and big enough to move into the larger garden beds. So basically, this is our little plant kindergarten. And just like in kindergarten, some of them behave very well, and some of them are already outgrowing their space. One example is my pre-grown leek. The roots had no more room left in the seed tray, so it was definitely time to move them into the nursery bed. If the roots stay too long in a small container, the plants can get stressed and stop growing properly. So today, the leek gets a new home with more space and hopefully a lot more motivation. Around the plants, the stone mulch helps protect them a little bit from cold and wind. It is not magic, of course, but every bit of protection helps, especially when the young plants are still small and the weather is not always on our side. Step by step, our little nursery bed is filling up with more life. Strawberries, radish, cauliflower, leek, and purple kohlrabi are now part of the next stage in our garden journey. Some of them will stay here for a while, some will move later into the bigger beds, and hopefully all of them will become part of our future harvest. Because every small plant we put into the soil today is one more chance for fresh food from our own garden tomorrow. We are also planting purple kohlrabi together. And here I want to show something very useful: how to separate little seedlings that have grown too close together. Sometimes when you start seeds, several tiny plants grow in one spot. If you just pull them apart, the roots can easily tear. So I like to use water to help loosen the soil around the roots. This makes it much easier and gentler to separate the little plants. It is a bit like untangling headphones, but with roots and a little more responsibility. With enough water, patience, and careful hands, the seedlings can be separated without too much damage. Then each little kohlrabi plant gets its own place in the bed, where it has enough room to grow. And after everything is planted, separated, and placed into the bed, we finish this step with another strong watering, because after all that moving, separating, and planting, the plants deserve a good drink. And honestly, so do we. But first, the plants. Now it is time to give even more of our little homegrown plants a new place in the garden. At home, our seed trays are slowly turning into a tiny green jungle. And as much as I love seeing all these young plants growing, we are running out of space. So today, some of them have to move out. It is basically plant moving day. We are planting small homegrown Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, and broccoli between all the other little plants that are already growing in our beds. Our goal is to create a colorful and diverse vegetable garden, not just one boring row of the same thing. We want different vegetables, different shapes, different colors, and hopefully later a beautiful harvest that gives us many options for cooking. Because for us, the garden is not only about growing food, it is also about thinking ahead to the kitchen. Cauliflower for creamy dishes, broccoli for quick meals, Brussels sprouts for cozy autumn cooking, and maybe for convincing people that Brussels sprouts can actually taste amazing if you cook them the right way. The young plants are still small and delicate, so we place them carefully between the existing plants. They need enough space to grow, but for now they look almost a little lost in the bed. But that is always the funny part with young plants. At first you think, are you sure this tiny thing will become a real vegetable? And then a few weeks later, the same plant suddenly takes over half the bed, like it owns the place. So we try to give them a good start with fresh soil, enough room, and a little patience. After everything is planted, we water the whole area again. Water is extremely important, especially after transplanting. The roots need good contact with the soil, and the plants need moisture to recover from the move. Freshly planted seedlings can get stressed very quickly if the soil dries out too much. So watering is not just a final step. It is one of the most important parts of planting. In the long run, we definitely recommend automatic irrigation, especially if you have several beds or cannot water every single day by hand. We still have to install our irrigation system in the new beds, but it is very high on our garden to-do list. Because let's be honest, watering everything by hand is nice and relaxing at first, until you realize the garden is bigger than your motivation after a long work day. So for now, we water everything properly by hand, one bed after another, one plant after another, and every little seedling gets a good drink. Step by step, our beds are filling up with more life. Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, broccoli, and all the other young plants are now part of our growing vegetable garden. And hopefully, with enough water, care, and a little bit of luck, they will become a colorful harvest for our kitchen later in the season. Now we move over to our existing raised beds. And here we found a little survivor, the lovage. We actually have no idea when it was planted, because we only took over this garden this year. So this lovage was already here before us, standing in the raised bed like, I was here first. And honestly, respect. It survived the winter, the garden chaos, and probably a long time without much attention. So of course, it is allowed to stay. Before we can plant anything new, I first remove the unwanted weeds from the bed. Some plants are welcome, some are useful, and some just invite themselves without asking. So I carefully clean the area and make space for the next vegetables. After that, we start refreshing the raised bed. Because raised beds need new material from time to time, the soil level goes down, nutrients get used up, and if we want our young plants to grow strong and healthy, we need to give them a good foundation. For this, I use molehill soil from our garden. Yes, we have moles here. They are not officially part of the gardening team, but they are definitely very active. And since they keep bringing beautiful loose soil to the surface, I decided to use it for the raised beds. So basically, the moles dig, and I collect. Teamwork, but without a contract. I fill some of this molehill soil into the beds, then I add fertilizer pellets and rock dust. The fertilizer helps provide nutrients for the plants, and the rock dust can support the soil with minerals. After that, we top everything up with raised bed soil and compost soil. This gives the bed a fresh layer full of structure, nutrients, and organic material. Once the bed is prepared, the first of our homegrown young plants are finally allowed to move in. This is always one of my favorite moments. The plants start as tiny seedlings at home, then slowly grow bigger and stronger, and now they finally get their place in the garden. It is a little bit like sending your children to school for the first time. You are proud, slightly nervous, and you hope they will not be eaten on the first day. After planting, we cover the soil with grass mulch. This helps protect the surface, keeps moisture in the soil, and slowly adds organic material as it breaks down. And of course, after planting and mulching, everything gets watered very well. Freshly planted seedlings need this. The water helps the roots connect with the new soil and gives them the best possible start in their new home. So now, one more raised bed is cleaned, refreshed, filled, planted, mulched, and watered. It may not look like a huge step at first, but in a garden, these small steps are exactly what create progress. And with every bed we prepare, our dream of growing more of our own food becomes a little more real. In this raised bed, we planted a colorful mix of vegetables: pak choi, cauliflower, kohlrabi, red cabbage, white cabbage, fennel, and several different lettuces. And the best part is, all of these plants were grown by ourselves from seed. That always makes planting a little more special. You do not just put a plant into the soil. You remember when it was just a tiny seedling at home, standing in a tray on the windowsill, looking very small and very dramatic. And now, these little plants are finally moving into the raised bed. Raised beds are really useful for growing vegetables, especially when you want to create good soil conditions. You can fill them with different layers, improve the soil quality, and give the plants a warmer, well-drained place to grow. They are also much easier to work with because you do not have to bend down as much. And after a long garden day, your back will definitely appreciate every centimeter of height. In our case, you can also see dimpled foil inside the wooden raised bed. This foil is not there because we wanted to decorate the bed in a very strange style. It has a practical reason. The dimpled foil helps protect the wood from constant moisture. Soil, compost, and watering can keep the inside of a wooden raised bed wet for a long time. Without protection, the wood could rot much faster. The small air gap created by the dimples also helps with ventilation between the soil and the wooden boards. So the foil is basically the raincoat of the raised bed. Not very fashionable, but very useful. For vegetables like cabbage, pak choi, kohlrabi, fennel, and lettuce, a raised bed can be a great place because the soil is loose, nutrient-rich, and easier to manage. Many of these plants enjoy good moisture and enough nutrients, especially the cabbage family. So we try to give them a strong start with compost, raised bed soil, fertilizer pellets, and rock dust. Of course, we also need to keep an eye on spacing. Right now, the plants still look small and innocent, but some of them will need quite a bit of room later, especially cabbage. Cabbage starts small and polite, and then suddenly behaves like it rented the whole bed. So we place everything carefully and try to give each plant enough space to grow. After planting, we cover the soil again with grass mulch. This helps keep the moisture in the bed, protects the soil's surface, and slowly feeds the soil as it breaks down. And then, very important, everything gets watered well. Freshly planted vegetables need a good start, especially after moving from their seed trays into the garden. The water helps the roots settle into the new soil and reduces transplant stress. So now this raised bed is filled with pak choi, cauliflower, kohlrabi, red and white cabbage, fennel, and lettuce. A little vegetable community, all grown by ourselves. And hopefully, with enough water, care, and a little bit of luck, this bed will become one of our first real harvest beds in the garden. From seed tray to raised bed, one more step closer to our own food on the table. After some time, the plants in our stone raised bed are growing really well. So I check them every week to see how they are developing, if the soil is still moist enough, and if everything looks healthy. It is always nice to see how quickly young plants can change. One week they look tiny and a little unsure, and the next week they suddenly look much stronger. And then Ginny comes into the picture. While I'm checking the plants, she has her own very important job, fence control. She walks along the fence and checks if there is any hole or little escape route. Very focused, very professional. Our little garden security manager. And honestly, this is important too. Since we are still working on the fence, we always need to make sure the garden is safe and properly closed for her. So while the plants are growing nicely, Ginny makes sure the fence is doing its job. Teamwork in the garden, just with very different priorities. Meanwhile, I continue watering the garden beds. In this bed, we planted asparagus, rhubarb, and horseradish. This is more of a long-term bed, because especially asparagus needs time and patience before you can really harvest it properly. So this is not a plant today, eat tomorrow kind of situation. This is more like plant now, wait, hope, and pretend to be a very patient person. The bed still needs to be mulched, but for now, the most important thing is watering. Freshly planted plants need enough moisture so they can settle in well and start growing strong roots. After that, I also water the potatoes again. They are still at the beginning, but potatoes need regular moisture, especially when they start growing. And since we already covered them with grass mulch, the soil should stay moist a little longer. So today, once again, the watering can and the garden hose are working overtime. But that is part of gardening. Plant, water, check, repeat, and hopefully harvest later. Then we moved to the back part of the garden, where we had removed the old tujas. Here we already built a simple but practical fence, and now we want to place the concrete slabs along it. Not the most glamorous garden job, but definitely useful. But before we start, I find a pretty big spider, at least big for me. It seems to be a house spider, and even though they can get quite large, they are harmless to humans. Still, when one suddenly appears, harmless is not exactly the first word in my head. After that little spider moment, we continue and move the water container to its planned place. Of course, the whole project was inspected by our guard dog Aries, who watched everything very seriously. So this area is slowly becoming useful again. Fence, slabs, water container, and apparently a spider included. Now we finally continue with the job that I was really looking forward to, planting our apple and cherry trees. These 3 little trees urgently needed to move into the garden. They were still standing in their pots. And honestly, at some point, a tree in a pot starts looking at you like, "Excuse me, I was promised a garden." So today is the day. We are planting our cherry tree and our apple trees, and this feels like a very important step in our garden journey. Because vegetables are wonderful, herbs are useful,
Raised beds are exciting, but fruit trees are something special. They are not just for one season, they are a long-term promise. When you plant a tree, you are not only thinking about this year, you are thinking about the next years, the future harvests, the cakes, the desserts, the fresh fruit from the tree, and maybe one day standing here with a basket full of apples and cherries, pretending we are very professional fruit farmers. The cherry variety we are planting is Regina, and the apples are Topaz apples. And I have to say, I really love Topaz apples. For me, a good apple should be sweet, juicy, and a little bit sour at the same time. Not too boring, not too flat, but with a nice fresh taste. And that is exactly why I love this variety. Topaz apples are the kind of apples that are delicious fresh, but also perfect for the kitchen. And as cooking people, of course, we are already thinking about recipes before the tree is even properly in the ground. That is very normal for us. Some people plant a tree and think, how beautiful nature. We plant a tree and think, apple pie, apple cake, applesauce. And yes, one of my favorite ideas for these apples is a classic American apple pie. I already have a recipe for that on the blog, and I can imagine how amazing it would be to make it one day with apples from our own garden. That would be really special. From our own tree, into the kitchen, into the pie dish, and then onto the table. That is exactly the kind of connection between garden and cooking that we love. But Topaz apples are also great for simple apple cake, homemade applesauce, baked apples, compote, or just sliced fresh as a snack. To be honest, most of the fruit probably will not even make it into a recipe because we love eating fruit fresh. There is just something different about picking fruit directly from your own garden and eating it right away. No supermarket, no plastic packaging, no long transport, just fruit from the tree. That is the dream. And of course, the cherry tree is just as exciting. We planted a Regina cherry tree, and now I am already thinking about cherry cake, cherry juice, cherry desserts, and maybe homemade preserves. But again, let's be honest, fresh cherries straight from the tree are probably the best version. There is something very nostalgic about cherries in the garden. They remind me of summer, warm days, red fingers, and eating just one more until suddenly half the bowl is gone. So yes, we are very excited about this tree. Now, before we can dream too much about cake and fruit juice, we actually have to plant them properly. The first step is digging the hole. And the hole should be roughly the size of the pot, or a little bigger, so the roots have enough space to settle in. The soil around the tree should not be too compact, because the roots need to grow out into the garden soil. So we dig out the earth, check the size with the pot, and make sure the tree will sit at the right height. This is important because the tree should not be planted too deep. It should sit approximately at the same level as it was in the pot. If you plant it too deep, the trunk can stay too wet, and that is not good for the tree. After the hole is ready, we add fertilizer pellets and rock dust. The fertilizer pellets help provide nutrients for the young tree, and the rock dust supports the soil with minerals. We do not want to overdo it, but we want to give the trees a good start in their new home. Then the tree goes into the hole, and this is always the moment where it suddenly feels real. Before that, it is just digging and soil and tools. But when the tree is standing there, you can already imagine what it might look like in a few years. A little bigger, a little stronger, maybe full of blossoms in spring, maybe with the first fruits hanging on the branches, and hopefully not looking at us like, "You forgot to water me." So after placing the tree, we fill the hole again with soil. We carefully press it down around the roots, but not too hard. The tree should be stable, but the soil should still have enough air and structure. Then comes the first watering. This first watering is very important because it helps the soil settle around the roots. It closes air gaps and helps the tree connect with its new place. Basically, it is the welcome drink for the tree. After that, we add bark mulch around the base. The bark mulch helps keep moisture in the soil and protects the surface from drying out too quickly. It also helps reduce unwanted weeds around the tree, which is very useful because young trees should not have to compete too much for water and nutrients. But it is important not to pile the mulch directly against the trunk. We leave a little space around the trunk so it can stay dry and healthy. Then we water again. Because after planting, trees really need enough moisture, especially in the first weeks and during dry periods. They have to settle in, grow new roots, and get used to their new place in the garden. So the routine is simple. Dig the hole, add fertilizer pellets and rock dust, place the tree, fill with soil, water well, add bark mulch, and water again. It sounds easy, but after doing it 3 times, you definitely feel like you had a small workout. Gardening is basically a gym membership with vegetables and dirt. Back at home, there was still one more little garden job waiting for me. Our onion seedlings had grown well, but they were getting a bit crowded in their seed tray. So it was time to separate them and give each little plant its own pot. I carefully repot them into small containers with vegetable soil so they have more space for their roots and can continue growing stronger. At first, they always look a little shocked after moving, like tiny green drama queens. But this step is important before they can later move into the garden. From now on, I will fertilize them every 2 weeks with liquid fertilizer until they are strong enough to be planted outside. And that was another busy garden day, planting, watering, checking, moving trees, and taking care of our young plants at home. Later this week, I filmed another little plant care session at home. This time, it was all about our young tomato, chili, and pepper plants. They have been growing really well, but their small pots were slowly getting too tight. So it was time to move them into bigger containers. For the new pots, I used vegetable soil mixed with perlite. The perlite helps to keep the soil a little lighter and better aerated, so the roots can grow more easily and the water does not just sit too heavily around them. And these plants are already getting used to outdoor life. They spend the whole day on the balcony now, getting fresh air, daylight, and slowly becoming stronger before they move into the garden. The plan is to plant them outside at the beginning of June when they are big enough, stable enough, and hopefully ready for real garden life. Because tomatoes, chili, and peppers are a little bit like garden divas. They love warmth, they do not like cold surprises, and if the weather is wrong, they will absolutely let you know. So for now, they stay on the balcony until the time is right. When I repot them, I carefully take each plant out of its old pot and check the roots. You can really see how much the roots have already grown and why they need more space now. I love these close-up moments because they show what is happening below the surface. Above the soil, you see leaves and stems, but underneath, the roots are doing all the hard work. Then each plant gets a bigger pot, fresh soil, and a little more room to continue growing strong. At the end, I also show you a quick look at all my pre-grown plants standing on the balcony. It is slowly turning into a small plant nursery out there. There are tomatoes, chili, peppers, and many other young plants waiting for their big move into the garden. And in between all of this green chaos, you can also see our peach trees on the balcony, full of little fruits already. That makes me so happy, because it shows that even before everything is planted in the garden, the season is already moving forward. Step by step, the balcony plants are getting stronger, the garden beds are getting fuller, and soon all these little plants will hopefully find their final place outside. And then the real growing season can begin. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Let's Do Gardening. If you enjoyed it, please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe, and join us on our journey from garden to kitchen. You can also visit my blog, LetsDoCooking.com, for recipes, garden updates, and more inspiration. See you next time at Let's Do Cooking Food Blog with Let's Do Gardening.